Thanks once again to everyone for joining us on this Friday before a long weekend, taking your lunch hour to sit in with us. The Business Resiliency team made up of the Grand Prairie District Chamber of Commerce, and we are honored to be working with the City of Grand Prairie and County of Grand Prairie on trying to help people get through what we're trying to get through right now. And to say it's been a challenge for everyone is probably the understatement of the year, but hopefully you've been able to find some resources and find the help that you've needed so far. The big challenge is that it changes on a daily basis and sometimes even an hourly basis. So trying to keep up with everything and trying to share it with as many people as we can has been definitely something that has taken some time and taken some effort, but I work with a great group of people. We meet with our guest presenter today, Chris King, and Hetty Hulse from the county, and Rebecca Lee, and Lauren LeVay from the city, along with our CEO, Tanya, on a daily basis. And we're trying, folks, and we know you're trying too. And so we're trying to provide these webinars on a variety of different topics. And this week, with the reopening for some businesses yesterday, we felt that it was important for you to get an understanding and a feel for what's happening with the Business Ambassador Program through GPREP. And no one better to help us do that than Chris King from the County of Grand Prairie Economic Development Department. And good to see you again, Chris. It's been a long time. What, how many hours now?
Yeah, I think we're almost coming up on 18 hours, Tom.
Wow, that's almost a record for us. But I will let Chris go into his presentation here. We do have the chat window that you can ask questions in there or indicate that you do have a question to ask. We'll try and let Chris go through his presentation, and then we'll go into sort of a question and answer period, and try and get you any information that Chris doesn't cover, and maybe just to catch you up a little bit again on some of the stuff that the Business Resiliency team has been doing if you aren't quite familiar with that. So enough of me. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Friday before a long weekend is not necessarily the ideal time to be doing these, but I guess you know, we have some timely information, hopefully, to share. That's been our primary role. Is you know, this is a public health emergency. It's being controlled by the province, and as municipalities and as the chamber, we're trying to figure out how to best support businesses in complying with the public health emergency and doing what we can that's within our control. So that's, you know, Tom has mentioned things are changing daily. I actually don't have a PowerPoint for you today. I do have a few slides that I'll put up. I'm sure everyone like me is probably burned out of PowerPoints and webinars and Zoom meetings, and is probably looking forward to hopefully some nice weather this weekend, although I'm a little angry with the weather forecaster. He's not giving me the info I wanted to hear for about the weekend. You know, and just get away from our computers and screens. That's probably dominated our lives. So Tom's given you a bit of information. Certainly the Business Resiliency Task Force is has been kind of the lead agency on this for a while in terms of how do we support businesses in getting through this. In terms of economic development, when we take a step back and we talk about economic recoveries and things after emergencies and disasters, of which a pandemic is one, we talk about the recovery phase and preparing for the recovery phase. This is a little different disaster than we've ever faced before. Obviously, you know, Fort McMurray fires, Fort McMurray flood, high river flooding. These were immediate emergencies that shut down or closed businesses, or in some cases destroyed them. And we were dealing with the physical reality of those disasters at the time. And that's what we're most familiar with in government, in the world. It's been over 100 years since we've had a real pandemic. So we recognized that waiting for recovery wasn't going to cut it. So the Business Resiliency Task Force was created with the intention of how can we support businesses to be resilient, to change their models, to change how they're doing business, to generate cash flow until there's some certainty. We're now at the point where there is some certainty, hopefully. We had the relaunch, reopening start effective yesterday from the provincial government. And that shifts us then into the reopening mode, and still focus on resiliency as well. Resiliency isn't going to go away for a while, but I still think we're a long ways away from dealing with the recovery component. As we were doing this, then we created the Business Ambassador Program through the Grand Prairie Regional Emergency Partnership. So those not familiar with that organization, that's an organization made up of the municipalities, the county, the city, the town of Sexsmith, town of Wembley, town of Beaver Lodge, and the hamlet of Hythe. Formed this organization quite a number of years ago. Actually, before I even came to the region in 2008, it had already existed. And it's to support each other during emergencies, large-scale disasters and emergencies, of which this certainly is one. So their focus primarily was on the public health component of it and ensuring essential services were in place. Their focus has now shifted in the last little while in preparing for the reopening that happened this week, with ensuring that supply chains are intact for businesses to get the PPE and other items that are required for businesses to reopen, to comply with those public health directives. So that's been what GPREP's focus is, and part of that is our Business Ambassador Program, which is a number of individuals from the chamber, the city, the county, who are phoning and in-person visiting businesses to find out, first of all, from the businesses that had stayed open, those that were deemed essential services, what are they doing that's best practice that we can share with others? And also, as importantly, what challenges did they have in complying with public health guidelines? Because we knew that if they had those challenges, others are going to have them as well. And so how can we try and resolve some of those problems before they even occurred? So one of the things that came out of that was access to personal protective equipment, or PPE, was identified very early on as a challenge. It was a struggle for businesses to find the PPE that was required. The Premier and Dr. Henshaw had said several times that where 2-meter distancing is not able to be maintained, a procedure mask is required. Procedure masks, fortunately, are not as difficult to find as a N95 mask, which I think are starting to become like hen's teeth, it feels like. But they certainly were not available in large quantities in Grand Prairie. And so we were able to obtain a supply of those and make them available to businesses through a program on the GPREP website. And again, for anybody taking notes, the GPREP website is gprep.ca. And under there, you'll see a tab for businesses. And one of the things on that tab is the PPE #4 biz, PPE for biz. And that program's still active and still available. So if you're looking for PPE, or you have friends that are looking for PPE because they're not able to maintain the 2-meter distancing in their workplaces, that's a resource that's available for you. We are working on, and we were informed today that we're likely looking at that by June 1st, we'll be able to end that program, because we will have reestablished good supply chains in Grand Prairie to businesses that wholesale these items to businesses. So your regular suppliers, hopefully for your other business supplies would have these items hopefully in place by June 1st. So the June 1st is a tentative date right now, where until a truck pulls up and shows up with a box full of masks, we'll hold off on making any further announcements about that, but just letting you know how we're working behind the scenes to try and support businesses. So those are a couple things. The other thing that we did with the Business Resiliency Task Force is our voucher program, which currently is full right now. We're not accepting any new applications. But so far we've helped 33 businesses in phase 1 of that program to determine what steps they can take to make their business resilient during the shutdown. And then 12 businesses have been approved in phase 2 of that program, which provides up to $3,000 to service providers that assist them with things like web design or setting up online payment systems or other HR related issues, et cetera, to reposition their businesses to be functional and operational during COVID-19. In terms of the Business Ambassador Program, which is kind of the point of this webinar, that's been a very effective program so far. We utilize those ambassadors actually to help us with the PPE for Business program. We started phoning businesses that were under phase 1 of the relaunch to determine what their PPE needs would be, to try and give us a guideline of what the scale of what we were going to be dealing with was. And that team was fantastic. They did, I think in 4 hours, they had contacted 86 businesses in a variety of sectors and given us some very good information on what those needs were, and that's what helped drive that PPE for Biz program. In terms of their other work, in terms of contacting businesses, what assistance do they need? What are they having struggles with? Are they aware of the resources that are out there? They've so far made 196 phone calls to businesses in the region. And again, the scale of this region is the county, the city, and then the towns and village within the county. So, and they've also done 157 field visits to those businesses. And just to be clear, those visits are not a public health inspection. They're not there to say our business is complying with the regulations. What they're there for is to say, to find out what's working really well, what's not working, and to offer suggestions and advice and resources to those businesses to help them with their plans for reopening. As Tom alluded to, this is changing very, very quickly. We met last night as a group, and about 25 minutes after we ended our meeting, Dr. Henshaw came out with a new announcement about what businesses need to be doing. So that announcement came out. I'm just opening it up to make sure that I'm reading it correctly. Just that all workplaces are expected to develop and implement policies and procedures to address COVID-19, including a plan to reduce the risk of transmission amongst staff and customers. We knew that businesses were being asked to do that planning. This is now an announcement that there's a formal plan required, and the completed plan must be posted in places of business or online within 7 days of the public being able to attend the business. Information and the plan template is available at alberta.ca/bizconnect. So that template is there as well. It's under the guidance for reopening, general guidance on that website. There's a template, relaunch considerations for businesses. So if you haven't already seen that, or completed it, I would strongly encourage that you do so, as it's now a requirement that that plan be posted within 7 days of reopening. So that's the latest and greatest news update that we had on that front. And again, it's the intention of all of this is for businesses, and I know it's incredibly overwhelming for some people to try and figure these things out and to just cope with it. Is that the first step is physical controls. We've all seen the grocery stores, they've got the plexiglass shields now for the cashiers. That's a physical control. The second is things called administrative controls. And some of those administrative controls are putting signage. You know, we've seen the stickers on the floor, stand here so you're 2 meters away from the person who's at the cash register. Keeping those distance. Some of the stores that have people lining up, they've got even tape marked out as a 2 meter box. Stay in your box while you're standing in line. If you have all of those in place and there's no way a member of your staff is getting within 2 meters of the public, there's no requirement for PPE under the public health guidelines. Where it's not able to keep it 2 meter distance, that's where we have to get into the PPE requirements. So try not to get too overwhelmed by this requirement to complete these forms. I'm not an expert in infectious control protection or prevention. None of us probably are. We're business people, we have other jobs, we do other things. We've now all been thrust into this world that we have to deal with them. So that's what we've been trying to do, is provide those resources. The county and the city and the chamber with their BRT program. The chamber's got a website. Whether you're a chamber member or not, you can access that website, and there's a number of resources there. Again, the GPREP.ca page is under the information for businesses, has a number of resources as well available. And what we're providing on both of those, and some have commented before saying, well, you're just giving me a bunch of links. That's correct. And the reason we're giving links is, you know, as I pointed out, I was working on this presentation and I've had to replace stuff 4 times in the presentation because it's been updated, it's changed. Some of it's been changing hourly. So we're trying to provide links to the documents rather than post the documents themselves so they become out of date. But what we have tried to do is direct you directly to those resources so that you're not being overwhelmed by other pages that have tons and tons of information. So try and take you right to those resources. So that's how we're trying to help a little bit with the information overload that I'm sure we're all facing. The other thing you'll notice is anything related to business, we're not giving you updates on how many cases, where they are, how to wash your hands. We're being inundated as members of the public constantly with that information from other sources. We're trying to make sure that the information we're providing to you as business owners or business managers, operators, is relevant and timely to what you're doing with your business. And again, that's part of the BA program, the Business Ambassador Program, is in the field, individual business, what's your individual issues that you have that we can maybe provide a resource or direction for you. We don't have all the answers. I know some people get frustrated when we say, no, we can't review your plan for you. We can't review that document and tell you if it's right or wrong. We're not public health inspectors. We're not public health officials. What we can do is help sometimes with breaking it down into what are the main components you need to be dealing with. It can be very overwhelming, but if you break it down into small bite-sized pieces, it's a little easier to manage. And hitting those highlights of what physical controls are you putting into place, what administrative controls are you putting into place, and then finally, what PPE requirements are left because those other 2 aren't effective. So those are the big ones. that we're working on. You've seen the announcements about the various federal programs, provincial programs that are available. Again, the business ambassadors are familiar with those programs and can direct people to the appropriate links and websites for those applications if they're not aware of them. So that's the main purpose of that program, is to try and make sure that as municipalities, as the chamber, as the local business community, how can we help each other to prevent an outbreak? We've been very fortunate. We haven't had a lot of cases. We want to make sure that continues to be the case. So that's first and foremost, the priority is reducing the infection count, flattening the curve. That term, I'm sure, I don't think there's anyone on the planet that hasn't heard the phrase flatten the curve and what we're trying to do there. Second, we want to do is support the businesses to be able to reopen, provide them the tools and supports they need to be able to reopen, and advice and support through the Business Resiliency Task Force to make changes to how we've always done business, maybe needs to change because of COVID. So we'll help support that as well. And then third is, we really want information from the business community. We want the business community telling us what are the challenges, what are the frustrations, where are the insurmountable problems that they have that perhaps we can address. And I think the PPE example is a great one that we've identified, that local suppliers weren't able to get these products. We were able to get them. We had some in stock in our own inventories, and we've made those available to the business community to help get them reopened and get them opening. And not just to prevent, loss of income and all of the other things that every one of you is facing as a business owner, getting your employees back to work, but also at the same time making sure that we're doing it the right way to prevent the spread of this virus any more than it already is being spread. So that's kind of probably a lot of information blasted at you fairly quickly. Again, the other thing I just want to touch on that I think is interesting. I just saw a few folks on here. Cam Curry's joined us from the Alberta government on the call. And one of the things that's very different here that I think I'd like to highlight is when we look at the total number of businesses, we have approximately 3,300 businesses within our area. So the county, the city, and the towns and village. Of those, about 3,300, 650 of them were deemed non-essential services and were required to close. So 2,700 businesses remained open from day one of this pandemic. Some did close because oil prices were down, or camps, the projects they were working on shut down or slowed down. Some of the construction companies chose to slow down or close, but they weren't mandated to close. Currently, our business ambassadors are trying to determine how many businesses reopened under phase one. So we know we have rough estimates of how many businesses were allowed to reopen under phase one, but we already know that several businesses we've spoken to who are allowed to reopen under phase one have chosen not to reopen right now. Some are saying they're going to wait till June, others are saying they'll wait till after the long weekend, and some are just saying it's not something they're looking at right now. They're concerned about their workforce, or they're concerned about how to reopen safely. I would say if you're in that last category and you're not reopening because you don't know how to reopen it safely, definitely reach out to us through the on the GPREP site. You'll see a link, an email. Reach out to us and we can certainly help perhaps with some of those concerns and questions that businesses may have on how to reopen safely. As well, on the BizConnect site, there is a website at the Alberta government. On their website, there is an email link for the BizConnect. it's a BizConnect email, and that reach out to that resource as well. If you have specific questions, the government's repeatedly said this, if you have specific questions about your business and how you can reopen safely, and are seeking some guidance or support from public health, that's the avenue to make those requests. And hopefully they can help provide some clarity or remove some of the confusion around it. So that's kind of the big picture, what we've done. I'm just going to quickly share my screen here to just show one other document, if I can find it. Do this one. So hopefully you can all see this and hear this. This is just a little video on the GPREP business ambassadors.
We can't hear it.
Okay. You say you can't hear it, Tom?
Yeah, no audio.
Okay, I apologize.
It's probably because your headphones are in.
Probably because my headphones are in. I apologize. Anyways, well, that video will be posted shortly. It's just some of our business ambassadors introducing themselves, explaining a little bit about the program, kind of what I've already said, but much shorter. It's a very short video. So I guess at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions if there's other people that have, or if anyone has questions.
Maybe if we could give people an idea of what questions the ambassadors are asking when they're contacting businesses. I think that's one of the first things when a business gets that phone call or that first contact, and it's like, okay, what are you looking for, sort of thing. Maybe if we could just give them an idea ahead of time, then they kind of have an idea what to expect.
Absolutely. I will just open that up here. So what we have is, so basically it's two surveys that we're doing with them. And the questions that we're asking are, sorry. I did have this open.
Part of that information overload.
Yeah, I apologize.
As you can imagine, there are a lot of files that we're trying to manage.
Yeah, there's a fair amount. Sorry, this is not, it's an online form that I've been working off of, and I'm trying to open it and it keeps closing because Zoom's taking my bandwidth, I guess.
I do have some questions that I printed off. The introduction is that the caller is part of the business ambassador team, a support function from GPREP and the Business Resiliency Task Force. The goal is to aid businesses in the implementation and education of physical distancing measures. Some of the questions are based around supply chain management, PPE procurement and use, and best practices taking place at your businesses. It goes into, we're not asking from an enforcement perspective. We want to ensure your business has the support and resources needed, and we'd like to gather information on best practices and procedures to prepare and support other businesses when the province lifts more restrictions. We want to ensure businesses have the support and resources they need to maintain smooth operations during the crisis. And it's a way of identifying the best practices that can be shared with other businesses. So some of the questions are general in nature. Some of them are maybe a little more specific, but again, it has nothing to do with enforcement. It's just about trying to understand what is needed to get businesses rolling and again. And if they have been doing some things that other businesses can take under advisement and use, then it's a win-win for everybody. So these calls are important to the overall economic picture of the region, and we hope businesses understand that. And we know the frustration. We know that sometimes the calls are okay, enough with the calls, enough with the surveys, enough with but these are very important questions to be out there, and we want to know if there are things that can be done to help.
Yeah, I think that's the important message, Tom. And we want to make sure the information we're providing in these webinars that we're doing are relevant and important. And some of the topics of these webinars have been directly from the business ambassador visits, where we've heard from individuals. These are the things that I need information on. So very early on, it was, what are the government programs? How do I apply for them? So we did the webinar on those. So walking people through some of those. Some HR issues was another one that had been identified.
Mental health issues too.
Mental health as well, as people were trying to figure out how to cope and how to how to support their employees that were struggling to cope with some of the stresses as well.
We had a question or a comment from Cami. Actually, you mentioned Cami Curry, and she's asking about elaborating a bit on best practices businesses have had. I guess if there are any examples or that businesses have been doing.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, some of the ones that I think are really good is those. There's some businesses that have been very proactive and creative with figuring out how to achieve the guidelines that are set out by public health. We've seen some very good practices implemented on the retail side with curbside pickups. There's some businesses, for example, in Grand Prairie, where you can order either on Facebook or online or over the phone, and they will do curbside delivery to your vehicle. My wife really wanted some chocolates from a local chocolatier here in town, and it was phone me when you're here, I'll walk out, I'll drop the bag off because we paid online, and then I'll back 2 meters away, you get out of your vehicle, grab it. They're putting in the physical distancing. They have a little table there. There's other businesses that are again using tables outside their business to keep people out of the store, only dealing with one person at a time, keeping their distance, but providing access to those things. Others are doing home delivery, dropping off on people's doorsteps. We're also seeing some really good practices with the floor stickers, some very creative use of those stickers on the floor. I'm sure we've all seen them in different grocery stores. Everybody go this direction so you avoid people passing each other in the aisles. Those have been very effective at maintaining that social distancing. We've also seen some really interesting sanitization procedures come into place, and the requirement for all visitors, all customers rather, to be wearing a mask before they come in to interact with other people. Those are some of the really good ones. Doing appointment booking. So businesses that never in the past would have booked appointments are now booking appointments to make sure there's only 1 or 2 people in their business at a time. If you don't have an appointment, there's a sign on the door that says, if you don't have an appointment, text us or Facebook us, and and if we don't have anybody, we'll let you in. Otherwise, you have to make an appointment. It's not been a huge inconvenience, according to them, for their customer base, but it's different. It's a change of how to do things, but it's an effective change, I think, in a lot of cases, to manage the number of people in the store and how to, just make sure everything works for everybody and avoid some of the frustrations that we've seen from other stores. We heard that early on from those stores that were open, but the grocery stores and pharmacies, angry customers, angry at people getting in their personal space, angry about having to wait in line. And I think some businesses have taken some really good steps to try and alleviate some of those frustrations their customers were having. I'm hoping that by this point, customers are getting less frustrated and are more understanding of why we're doing all of this, and that it's all for the better public health. But so those are some of the steps we've seen. Definitely the shift to online is the big one. The store deliveries. Others are doing, they're switching their shifts for people, or they're establishing shifts where they never had shifts before, in an effort so that if there is an outbreak again, not all of their staff are impacted by that potential exposure. So alternate days, for example. Staff work one day and then they don't work the next day. It's a completely different crew that comes in, and there's somebody doing, sanitizing all the surfaces in between the two shifts. So we're seeing some of that. And restaurants, for example, some of the best practices we've seen out of restaurants, examples we've seen is where they've got table layouts such that they are keeping the tables 2 meters apart from the next group, but then they're also establishing one table as that's where the server drops off the dishes. They drop off your meal at this table, and then they go away and you get up, go grab it and sit back down. So the server doesn't have to get within 2 meters of the customer at the restaurant. So, and there's others that are using, they've got one person in their restaurant that actually delivers food to the table, and they're wearing a mask. The rest of the employees are not wearing masks. They're all keeping social distancing, but the person who actually brings the food to the table is wearing a mask. It helps the business keep the cost down for PPE for everybody. It's also really hard to smile at somebody if you're wearing a mask and make them feel welcome and supported. So, they're trying to find a blend of means, and different businesses have chosen to do different things, but those are a couple of ones that really stood out for me, is, identifying one person who's going to be interacting, and that person, because they're interacting with customers, they mask the whole day. Their entire shift, they're masked up because they're the only one that might be exposed to the customers, and they're keeping their distance from the rest of the staff. So some fairly clever procedures, I think, that we've seen.
You talked about masks. You talked about some other PPE items. Challenges with that. There's only so much to go around, isn't there?
There is. We've had some difficulties with those. And then, as I said, you can get masks through the GPREP, the PPE for Biz program. You can apply online for PPE there. We're not going to be able to supply you 200 masks a week through that program, but we can certainly get you some. And I think the main effort, I would encourage businesses in terms of keeping your costs down. I know it's come up several times on the provincial calls. Businesses saying, who's going to compensate us for this increased cost of doing business? We haven't heard any clear answers yet from the government on any compensation for these increased procedures. So the conversation I've had with businesses that seem to have a real good handle on it is looking at physical distancing or physical controls and administrative controls. Those are the cheapest to implement, versus PPE, which is a constant churn. You're constantly having to replace it. paper masks only last so long. You got to throw them out. You got to put on a new one. These are, that's a very big expense for a business. So minimizing the use of those is probably going to be the most cost-effective way that we can all deal with this. The other advice that we've seen on public health and the federal government's website as well has some good resources on, bleach and water is just as effective sanitizer as any of the commercially available sanitizers for cleaning surfaces. That's readily available. It's easy to use. You can put it in a spray bottle. Follow the guidelines that are on the public health website for the use of that. You can keep your costs down by doing some of those things, and then also figure out, does appointments mean you have less areas to control, less areas to clean and sanitize? I haven't talked to any of the clothing retailers in Grand Prairie yet. I'm not sure how they're going to deal with them, but we've been hearing some interesting variety of solutions from clothing retailers in other parts of the country and other parts of the world on how they're dealing with like people want to touch and put on clothes, and then people don't want to go there because somebody might have coughed on it or sneezed on it, or making sure that I'm safe. So that's kind of the big one, and I think that it's going to be important. The best person to answer that question is probably you. You know your client base better than anybody else. What does your client base, what do they respond well to? What don't they respond well to? And ask some of your good clients. Is this, if we did this, it complies with public safety, but is that enough? Does that make you feel safe? Is it not? Is it inconvenient? Talk to get some feedback from your customers, and ask them what they want. We've seen Retail Council of Canada's come out with statistics that say as high as 85% of Canadians do not feel comfortable going into a store that is not taking extreme precautions to protect their health and safety. I don't know if that statistic applies in Grand Prairie, if we would be that high or not. But people seem to appreciate the effort that when it's made, they understand why we're doing it, and people seem to be able to adapt to doing things a little bit differently. So, but I know it, having been involved with several businesses that have failed or struggled over the years, I know that it's difficult to sometimes think about the good as you're coping with a mountain of bills and no cash flow, and trying to deal with teaching elementary school at home and everything else that we're all struggling with, and the social isolation and laid off employees and all the other concerns, which is why I certainly would suggest reaching out. One of the questions the business ambassadors do ask is, how are you coping? How are your employees coping? That's not just a financial coping, it's also mentally. How are you guys coping? What supports and services might need to be implemented? We did the session last week on mental health. Just some support. Hey, you're not alone in this. We're all here to help each other.
I had a question, how are restaurants managing with not being able to have public washrooms open? And I guess that's something we take for granted, but it's something that has to be taken into consideration right now.
That's the first time I've been asked that question.
There you go.
I have not had anybody ask me about public washroom closures. And honestly, I'd have to open the guidelines to see if that's a requirement. We do know some have been for pickup only and have said, no, the washrooms are closed. Others are not closing their washrooms. We know that they're keeping them open, and they've increased their sanitization, just their cleaning of the washrooms to a higher frequency. or putting a hand sanitizing station outside of the washroom for when people leave. So, you know, hand washing is supposed to be the first protection. That's our primary form of protection. That's what Dr. Tam and Dr. Henshaw are telling us. But others are choosing to close their public washrooms, yes.
Phases. This whole phase thing, that I think has some businesses a little, I don't know if confused is the right word, but I mean, there's some businesses that have parts of their business that fit into one phase, another phase, and that's something that I guess has to be taken into consideration too, as the ambassadors and others reach out to these businesses.
Yeah, and we've seen a little bit of that, mostly on the oil and gas side, where the companies got multifacets of their business. On the food services side, there's a little bit. Some have bars, and the restaurant are separate, and so, you know, they're having to juggle how they are reopening some of their restaurants / bars, because the bar side's not actually allowed to be open right now. Others are opening it up with the so 50% capacity for the restaurant is expanding into the bar side as well, so that there's they can serve a larger number of customers under the 50%. And they're working with public health. Anyone who's doing that is working directly with public health and the fire marshal's office to make sure that the seating capacities are correct and adequate.
Rebecca actually posted, I imagine this is from the guidelines, washroom capacity must allow for distancing between guests. For example, consider closing alternate urinals. So there you go. It's all about the distancing, and it's all about kind of not being able to pee on your partner's leg. Is that, can we say that? This isn't public television, we can say that, right? But I mean, you got to have some levity at this point. It's yeah. How long do you see this program running? I mean, you mentioned we over 3,000 businesses to try and touch base with, and you know, that's quite a mountain to climb. But how just sort of how do you foresee this program moving ahead? It's probably not a fair question, but if you have kind of a sense.
I would say definitely we're going to see the ambassador program continue until, I mean, I guess the easy answer is until it's not needed. I would say probably until we're in stage 3. Likely in stage 3, we would then shift. Compliments to all of our ambassadors. Tom is one of them. Compliments to them all. They've been incredibly flexible and resilient themselves. We sometimes send them out in the morning with what we want them to do for the day, and we contact them at 10 o'clock and say, oh, change of plans. Go find out what businesses need for PPE, as an example. We'll shift their focus probably to look, you know, as we move into the recovery stage. I think we'll still continue the ambassador program. That's my gut is telling me that right now. Nothing official on that. But definitely recovery is, of course, that'll be the final phase of this whole COVID-19, hopefully, will be the recovery phase. And I think we'll see the ambassadors up until the end of that, probably reducing their numbers down over time. Currently, I think we're ramping up and increasing the numbers right now, or we're looking at increasing the numbers right now from, I think we're at 12, and now we've got a few that are leaving the program as they return to, they were on loan to us because their positions at the city or the county were, their services weren't required, but as we're moving into reopening cities and county facilities, some of those individuals are returning, so we're looking for additional folks. But yeah, I think we'll see the Business Ambassador Program continue until the end of the recovery phase in some way, shape, or form.
Denise, looking for just some clarification, wanted to ensure she heard the figure correct, that there are 3,300 businesses in the area and 2,700 remained open.
I would not say 2,700 remained open. I would say 2,700 were considered essential services and were not required to close. Some did choose to close. Some shut down because they didn't have employees. Their employees were sick. Others had no childcare, so their employees weren't coming in. Others, I mean, the other disaster we've had as a province is not just COVID. We also have oil that for a while was trading at less than $1, less than zero. And so some businesses just said, well, we're not operating at that price point. So I wouldn't say that's a fair statement. 2,700 remained open. I would say 2,700 were not required to close. They were deemed essential services.
That's quite a number. It's a big number. Dr. Hinshaw mentioned that by the end of next week or beginning of the following week, if there is a spike in COVID numbers, we might go back into a lockdown. Would the Business Ambassador Program change the strategy of calling on businesses if this happens?
Yes, absolutely. That, like I said, these folks are very resilient. That program is very resilient. We're changing, and we're having to change based on directives from public health. So if that was the situation, I think we would probably be going backwards a little bit in terms of now dealing with the businesses just got shut down again. What a support do you need to be able to get through until you can reopen, and hopefully we'll have some clear timelines on what those reopening dates might look like. But certainly if that was the case, we would have to reevaluate what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Yeah, I think in some ways we all need to be ambassadors and take pride in the fact that, I mean, we have managed to keep numbers low. We've been doing the right things. We've been doing the social distancing. We've been very careful, and I'd love to see that continue. And you know, I think through this program we can share some good ideas with businesses. I know there's a couple of participants on the call that deal with PPE and that sort of thing. Who can they get a hold of if they have supplies possibly available, or they can have, you know, maybe some sources or resources that GPREP or others can consider?
Well, the first is there's a link, and maybe I'll get Hetty to put the link in the chat here. She's been working with businesses that supply these items to advise businesses there's where they can go get those different items. So I would probably have them connect to that link. I think there's a survey link that Hetty has, and hopefully she can get that put into the chat there. That would be the first thing. And again, that GPREP site is probably the best. And I see Rebecca put it in the gprep.ca PPE for Biz program. She put that link in the chat for us. Reach out to us through that if you've got resources. And there's the link for the GPREP community suppliers just came up as well. So, you know, those that have access to some of those things, if you can help supply other businesses, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Right on. Thanks, Chris. We're hitting 1 o'clock here, and I know people maybe have some plans for the long weekend. So out of respect for everyone's time, unless there are any other questions, we want to thank first Chris for putting this together for us and providing some excellent information. And again, thanks in the background to Rebecca and Hetty and Lauren and that whole team for just being amazing. Like they've been great to work with, and we love working with them and trying to help folks as we're going through this. Thanks to everyone for taking the time to sit in on this call. Thanks for everything that you do, and for those watching on recording, we're thinking of you as well. And reach out to GPREP, reach out to the BRT, reach out to your local government officials. We have a number of those on the call as well. Thank you to all of you, because you're in a position that nobody else has ever been, and you're making decisions that are really hard and really tough, and you're trying to take people into consideration, and you're taking business into consideration, and it does not go without a thank you. So to everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll talk again soon. Bye now.
Bye-bye.